started. Before we kick off too much, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional lands of many different nations. The HunterWiSE team respectfully acknowledges the traditional Aboriginal owners of the lands we live and work, the Awabakal, Worimi, Darkinjung, Biripi, Wanneroo, Gringai and Eora nations. You're also very welcome to acknowledge the traditional lands that you're currently on in the chat. I'm happy for you to do that. That would be great to see the range of locations that we are at the moment. I pay my respect to elders past, present and future. And I acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. I also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd also like to acknowledge that the First Nations people of this continent were the first scientists, engineers and mathematicians, and have been practitioners of this knowledge for tens of thousands of years. So HunterWiSE, if this is your first HunterWiSE event, know that you're very welcome here. HunterWiSE is an initiative for women in STEM throughout the Hunter region specifically, but very happy to have opened up a little bit more this evening with an online event to connect, collaborate and establish mentorship opportunities. HunterWiSE aims to increase overall participation of STEM by women by 2 interlinked initiatives. So we've got a targeted high school outreach program, as well as a series of networking events like this one for female STEM professionals across the Hunter. So HunterWiSE was established by a team of passionate female identifying academics from the University of Newcastle, who I've had the absolute privilege to be able to work with over the years, and they've shared a lot of knowledge and advice and wisdom and coffees over the time. And the initiatives are made possible through the ongoing support of the University of Newcastle and a number of regional sponsors, which are listed here. So thank you for coming. So a little bit of housekeeping to start. So while the speakers are on, if we can keep our mics muted, feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go. We won't be answering them after each speaker, but we'll collate them together and ask a few at the end. So the structure will be that we've got our 4 fabulous speakers who will be giving a short little, well, a 10-minute overview of their STEM career and how they've managed to navigate their career pathway. And then at the end, we'll have time for all of us to have some questions together. And then we thought it would be good to break into some smaller rooms since we can't do the sort of unofficial networking anymore. So we can break into smaller rooms and keep it a little bit more for more questions and follow-ups. So you'll just be allocated into rooms at the end of the session. So we are the stories that we tell. This evening, I'm joined by 4 women who have pursued their STEM careers down very diverse pathways. I'd like to welcome Drs. Ria Aggarwal, Madeleine Dupont, Lizzie Lowe and Kim Van Netten. Over the next hours, our guests will share a little of their own story with a focus on their own career paths. And in my opinion, they are the new generation of leaders who have PhD qualifications, very well versed in STEM and working in the worlds of industry and government. So our first speaker I'll introduce is Dr. Riya Aggarwal. I won't do the blurb for you because I'm sure that we're going to hear all about you, hopefully throughout the course of your presentation. So very welcome, Ria. I'll hand over to you now. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Jessica. So hi, everyone. Jessica have already given the wonderful introduction, but still I will give you a little bit background about myself. So myself, Ria Agarwal, and I'm a digital innovation engineer up here at Queensland. Whereas I develop solutions to help Whereas to better use their data to optimize operations using artificial intelligence. So for example, automatically locate road, building, bridges defects, sewage pipeline defects, and many more. Today, I will walk you up through my journey from an international student to a permanent resident full-time job holder. Jessica have mentioned this, but I will still say that I will welcome questions later at the breakout groups. So make sure you remember them by the end of this. All right, so let me start from the overall journey, and then I will talk more about it. So I started with my bachelor's and master's all in mathematics back in India. And my master's was in applied mathematics. So for all of you who are not aware of this, mathematics is having two branches, which is pure and applied. I was more declined towards the applied mathematics because it is more like a visual treat, which you don't get much in pure mathematics. And from the top of it, mathematics was never my career choice, never ever. I was good at maths in school, but I never thought of making, this as my career. Surprisingly, I wanted to be a lawyer, but my destiny wanted mathematics for some reason. I went really sick after my high school, due to which I had to take a break for a year. And in India, you have to give entrance exams for everything. Even if you want to enter a university for a basic course, you have to give the entrance exams. So I had to give the low entrance exam in extreme pain because of my health condition. And my parents were really not happy with it. But I was really passionate about it. And I was like, no, I will give the exam, whatever the situation is. So I was able to secure some sort of ranking, which was not that great for higher level universities, but I was able to secure some good universities. But then the day we had to go for my admission, sadly, my parents had to admit me in the hospital instead of the university because my condition got worse. And by the time I got recovered, I realized that I lost the chance of getting the admission in the law school. And then I had to take that year break. And that was the time my parents said, like, okay, they changed their mind. They didn't allow me to go and live alone and study because I was not in that shape and condition. So they said, like, you have to study something else or you have to take another year break. And at that time, I was not really ready to waste another year of my life. And that's how mathematics came in my life, because when I started exploring options, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, but mathematics was the only option left for me at that time. So I thought, like, okay, let me do this for a moment, and then maybe I will change my stream after bachelor's, or maybe in between if I get some good options. But I thought to start with that, and time flies. And I started liking mathematics. But the moment I started liking mathematics, I realized that my bachelor's is about to finish. So that was the time I need to think about my future, like what after that. Then I came up with two stream ideas, which was the master's in mathematics or MBA. So for some reason, which I'm not sure till date, I chose master's in mathematics. I again have to give entrance for, so I was really interested in two universities, but not in the second one much. So I really wanted to go to Delhi University because that was the really renowned one. And the other one was offering applied mathematics, but that was kind of a new university. So I was really not into that. So I gave the entrance and I got my result. And I was not selected at the university I wanted to go. And surprisingly, the entrance I gave with half-hearted for the other university, I secured 28 rank, not only all over India, but all over South Asian countries. And hundreds of thousands of people give that entrance. So the difference, like I realized at that time, so the university I wanted to go, I gave that entrance with so much pressure on me because that was the thing I really wanted to do. And because of that, I did a lot of blunders. And the second entrance I gave with such a free mind because I was knowing that I'm not in a position to lose anything. I did my best. So that was the first learning in my whole career, that never take pressure of anything. If that thing is meant for you, you will get that by any means. So after that, I did my master's in applied mathematics, and that was the university which gave me everything what I have today in my life. So that was the place where I met one professor from the University of Newcastle. He was my co-supervisor later on. So that day, I was not even knowing that I'm meeting my future somehow, but that was the day we were just having a casual chat, like how's life in Australia, how it is different, like the university life, or students' life, and everything. Then one day he came with an email and he told me, like, there's an opportunity for PhD in Australia. If you want, you can apply for that. Then I did apply, and that professor didn't reply. So I don't want to take name, but I received no reply at that time. And I was like, okay, anyway, I was not very interested. So then he came up with another project. He said, like, okay, he's also involved in that project. So if you want, you can apply for that. And I applied for that project. And luckily that my principal supervisor, he just replied back to me in just 2 days. And he liked my profile so much that he selected me just in 15 days. So that was like a big changed in my life. But by till that time, I never told my parents that I'm doing something like this. And in India, sending their daughters outside without marriage, it's such a big deal. So I had to convince my parents, like, by any means, that I have to take this opportunity and I have to go there. So after a few fights, they were pretty okay, because my brother was already in US. So he kind of, influenced them that it's okay. Life is not that bad outside. It's actually better. So let her go. And I arrived in Australia and I got another attack, because the moment I arrived in Australia, I met my principal supervisor. He said, like, okay, Ria, I'm leaving you on your co-supervisors and I'm going to UK for a year. I was like, seriously, I just came here on your, confidence, and now you're leaving me. And that was the year, because I got selected in a PhD, which was in mechanical engineering, which was not my background. I was knowing nothing about it. So it was pretty hard for me. So that year was really, really hard for me to do that transition. But the moment I started understanding everything and started liking that, then I got another attack in my PhD. And I wouldn't say what happened exactly, but that was a really, really setback for me, because that time nothing was moving in my PhD. And that was the time I was already in my second year. I was not even having an option to change or anything. Then I had to come up with some sort of idea, like, what is plan B? Then I started thinking about what is plan B. So I came up with the idea that let's apply for some part-time research projects, and I started emailing all the professors around the world. Then I waited for around 6 months, but nobody replied. Then one day, one professor from the University of Bradford, UK, he replied back to me. He really liked my master thesis and everything which I told him in the email. And he was really interested to work with me. Then he came up with the idea and he asked me, do you like to work in artificial intelligence? And that was the first time I heard about artificial intelligence in the research context. I was like, nothing about it. And I don't know, but I just said yes. I was like, okay, I'll just say yes and think about that later on. I'll just do some research and I will see later on. The moment I started working on that project, I started liking it so much that I made my mind that I want to pursue my career in artificial intelligence. But that wasn't easy, because I was coming from a mathematics background. Then I was doing PhD in mechanical engineering. Then I wanted to go in artificial intelligence. So I mean, it was kind of a similar kind of thing, but still, there was not a direct chain, because in industries, if you go with a mathematics degree, they won't even call you for interviews. They will straight away reject your application. I don't know the reason why. Maybe they have more computer science and engineering people, and that's why they prefer them. So then I started thinking, like, how can I make artificial intelligence my career? Then I came up with an idea that if you do internship, that will give you a kind of like a stamp that you belong to that field. So I chose to do internship. Then I came across the API internship program, which actually is for all PhD students. But that was also a setback, because they said they have no rebates for the international students. They have only 50% rebates for the local students, and company always prefer local students because they are getting rebate, and that makes sense. Then I tried to reach the companies by my own side without any program or something. I thought like they might be trusted, because that was the company exactly working on my PhD project. So they were working on the airport scanners and all that stuff, and that's what I was doing PhD in. But I received no replies again. And then I got a news one day that API internship is now finally giving 20% rebates to the international students. And then I was like, okay, this is the time. I need to apply now. And then I applied with the same company. I got selected after the 2 rounds of interview. Then just right before my joining, company, that was a US company, and that was all coronavirus time. So they said, like, we are not going with the project ahead, because US is really struggling. They were in lockdown, and a lot of people were already losing their jobs. So they decided not to proceed with the new project at the moment. And that was, again, a big setback for me. And I was like, no, I'm not going to apply for anything else, because I have done so much thing, and still things are not going great for me. And that was just an anger. That was just that moment. And after a week, when I got my senses again, I started applying to more companies. And then I applied to various projects, which was nowhere related to my PhD, which was nowhere related to my background. Literally, I was having no connection with the project itself, because that was more like geospatial GIS world. I was not even knowing G of that. So that gave me a lesson that to do something in your life, you don't need really information of that. You can learn at that step. So, and after starting that internship, I was just halfway through, and that company offered me a full-time job, which I'm doing currently. I was not even completing my PhD. I was still doing that internship, but they were so impressed with my just enthusiasm and the way I was working, the way I was communicating, the way I was talking and thinking about the project. They were really impressed by me. And that was the learning I got at that time, that be persistent. Really, that is the key, because if you are just being persistent, you will get something or better in your life at some stage. And when I'm doing this job and I'm realizing that getting satisfied and stopping is never a solution. So never get satisfied in your life. Always dream for more and always go ahead with that. Only you know what you are capable of, not your family, not your friends, not your partners. It is only you who know yourself, your capabilities. But for me, it was more important to stick with my dreams, regardless what world have to say about me. When nobody know what you are capable of, they should not be able to let you down by their words or actions. When I came to Australia, I was like a small baby. I never lived away from my family. I was not even knowing how to live alone. And from standing in sun to wait for the bus, to drive my own car, from paying rents to pay someone else's mortgages, to now building my own house to pay my own mortgages right after finishing my education. It's all my hardship, not anyone else. So whatever you do, it's your dream and hardship. So be persistent, be motivated, and keep moving. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ria. I 100% agree. Like, I think it can be really hard for international students when they're finishing up their PhD as well, just not knowing where to turn, what to do next. There's a lot of different options out there. And once you find the right one, then, it all clicks into place. And I think what you said as well about being persistent and also backing your skills, like just having that understanding that you have value and back yourself, you can do those jobs, you can do those positions, just keep applying. Exactly. All right, well, we might move on to our second speaker and we'll have more time for questions for Ria later. So make sure you pop them in the chat now if you don't want to forget them, or we'll get to them later. All right, so now I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Madeleine Dupont. So Madeleine completed her Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and PhD at the University of Newcastle, but once again, I won't do the full blurb. I'll let her talk to us about her career journey. So up to you, Madeleine.
Sure. I'll just start sharing my screen. Give me a second. I think you can all see that now?
Yes, thank you, Madeleine. Off you go.
Great. Okay, so I'll give you a quick sort of overview of my own career journey, which is from chemistry to cybersecurity, which seems like a really weird change, and everyone's always sort of like, how did you do that? So I'll talk you through, and it might make more sense at the end about how I got there. So I'll start off at the end, really, which is my current role. So I'm a security intelligence analyst in the security group at the National Broadband Network. And I'll give you a really quick overview of what that involves, because it's a job that no one's really heard of. And to be honest, I'd never heard of it before I started doing it. So basically, like me and our team, like our job is to provide intelligence support to the security team. And this includes looking at all aspects of security. Like, we mostly do cybersecurity, but we also look at physical security and other business risks. And mostly what this job involves is we write intelligence reports. So this is providing information to members of security team to make informed decisions about risks. So this involves typically research. We do a lot of reading, whether that's academic literature, industry reports, news and analysis, so we can give overviews on current threats or current concerns. We do a bit of data engineering. So we like to collect data and we get that from different sources. So sometimes that's our internal databases, sometimes it's open source. So we collect, we do automated data collection so we can keep up to speed with a lot of things. We also do a bit of data analysis and data science. So sometimes this is just really simple analysis. Sometimes we try to do a bit more advanced stuff. So we do a really big, a wide range of roles, and everyone on our team has kind of come from a different background and everyone has their own strengths. But yeah, it's a really cool job. We get to do a lot of different things and super interesting to be a part of. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. So this is my career journey. I'll start off at the beginning. So I started doing a Bachelor of Science at Newcastle University after I left high school. At this point, I had no real career plan. I liked science. I figured I may as well study a science degree, and I grew up in Newcastle, so I figured University of Newcastle was a great place to start. I did an honours year at the end of this, and it was a project in electrochemistry. And I really liked that. I really liked doing research, and I thought that continuing on with research was a really good idea. So I got to the end of this degree. didn't really have an idea about what I wanted to do for the job, but knew that I liked research. And my supervisor said, you know, why don't you do a PhD? I was like, well, why not? I've got nothing else to do, which was really the thought process that went into it. So I stayed on with that same supervisor, did a PhD, and it was developing mathematical models. So looking at electrochemical capacitors, which are an energy storage device. So this was a really, like it was chemistry, but it's very heavy data analysis. So lots of like measuring things, analyzing data, lots of repetitive data analysis. So I figured that a good way to make my life a bit easier would be to teach myself to code. So I got MATLAB and learned to code. And I've decided that, like, I found that I really loved that. Like, I'd done a coding course back in undergrad and I hated it, but now that I kind of had a use for it, I really loved it. So I kept sort of focusing on data heavy projects. Towards the end of my PhD, I still didn't really have a career plan. I loved research, was a bit ambivalent about academia. So I wasn't sure if I should, you know, find a different sort of research career or pursue academia. But I guess I needed a job at the end. So I applied for a bunch of research positions, mostly in academia, some not, and ended up taking a job as a postdoctoral research fellow at Deakin University in Melbourne. So I took this job for a few reasons. I mean, the project sounded interesting. It was more electrochemistry. It was stuff that I liked. And I guess for personal reasons as well, my partner was writing up his PhD at the time, and we figured that Melbourne might be a good place to move because we have contacts there. There's a few different unis. So we thought for the both of us, it was a good place to go. So this was like a great place to work. Deakin was great, but I didn't really love the project, and I was finding I was like losing a bit of motivation with being in academia. So at this point I was thinking maybe academia is not the best choice, but I didn't really know what else to do because it's kind of hard sometimes to know what other jobs are available. So I was talking to a friend and mentor who was at RMIT, and he sort of suggested that he could see if he could find me something at RMIT, and he knew someone who was looking for a postdoc at RMIT. So I went and did another postdoctoral research position at RMIT in Melbourne. And this was a different sort of project because my supervisor basically said, do whatever you want, like you can research whatever you feel like, you're free to go. And this was good and bad. I think it made me realize that I didn't maybe love academia and I wasn't that motivated without some sort of strict goals. So after a little while of doing this, I kind of realized that academia was probably not the best career choice for me, but again, didn't really know what else to do, which is why I landed on data science as maybe a career to head towards because it involved a lot of coding, it involved a lot of sort of maths and that sort of problem solving stuff, which I really liked. So I started working on more complex data analysis projects at RMIT, which was great because I had the freedom to sort of research what I felt like. So I learned new programming languages, I worked on machine learning projects, and all of that with the aim of moving into a data science career. So I stayed there for about 18 months. And yeah, about halfway through 2019, I moved to NBN as an intelligence analyst. Now, this last move from a traditional academic career into a sort of corporate job is where people are most sort of interested to know what happened and what my moves were here. So I'll go into that in a tiny bit more detail. So like I said, at this point, my career plan was data science. So I worked on coding a lot, developing my coding skills as much as I could in my current job, did some online courses, did some big ones like Coursera, Udacity. I even did a graduate certificate, which was in hindsight probably overkill, but you know, it was interesting. I applied to a lot of data science jobs, had a few interviews, which was really encouraging because it meant that I wasn't completely out of my league. And then I ended up being contacted by a recruiter on LinkedIn for this job at NBN. It was originally a data engineering position and there wasn't an awful lot of information about it. And if you're not familiar with it, a data engineering position is kind of related, but not exactly the same as data science. It's kind of an overlapping job and it wasn't exactly what I was after. But at this point I was kind of desperate and I was like, I'll go to it, talk to this team, see what it's about. And, you know, I wasn't that keen, but so I went to an interview with the team and I think that really changed my mind because although it wasn't exactly the job that I was after, the team were really cool. They seemed like they were just the sort of like people I really wanted to work with. And once I learned a bit more about the position, I thought it sounded pretty good. And I think once they learned a little bit more about me, they kind of adjusted the position. So it wasn't like strictly a data engineering position. It was more of a broad kind of intelligence analyst. And so I ended up taking on that position and it's been really good. I think going with my gut in terms of knowing that the team was a great team to work with turned out to be super successful, because they are. It's a really, really great team, and it's ended up being a really good career move. But I think probably it took me maybe like a year from deciding that academia wasn't really for me to starting this new position. So it was like big effort. It's not that easy to leave. But I learned a lot through leaving academia. Sometimes people, when you're in academia, it can be hard to know what's available like outside and how to best move out of academia. So I learned a lot. I had a few people like after I left ask me, what I did for some advice. And so I've very recently sort of started a little startup to try to share some of my experience and some of the experience I've learned from other people who've also left. So it's called Degrees of Freedom. And it's just a career consultancy service and a blog, just kind of trying to give some people advice on, I guess, exactly this, how to navigate diverse career paths. Like the idea is, you're not necessarily trapped by what your degree topic was in. You can branch out. There's plenty of jobs out there that you might not even know exist, but you have the skills for, or you can develop the skills for. So we've got a blog and a Twitter, so feel free to follow us. But yeah, so that's a really whirlwind overview of my career path. And I think it's safe to say that at no point did I ever have a career plan. I just kind of took the opportunities that came up, and it's worked out pretty well. So.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Maddie. Yeah, I love that you didn't really have a career plan, just sort of, but in a way you do, because I think the little incidental decisions that you make along the way do end up shaping where you end up. So you're doing a PhD in electrochemistry and you're doing data analysis. It's not normal actually to do that much. And I'm sure that if you were less inclined towards that, you wouldn't have done as much as what you did in your PhD and ended up being able to pursue that further, even in your postdoc positions. As you said, you were able to sort of focus on those a little bit more, and then you actually realize, this is the career I want to pursue.
Yeah, I think you're right. More like a culmination of tiny decisions rather than one big one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for that, Maddie. I've got lots more questions, but we'll leave that for the end, and we'll move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Lizzie Lowe. So I'll invite Lizzie to come on. So Lizzie is a fellow superstar of STEM. She's an alumni now, so she graduated from the program that myself and Dr. Hannah Power are a part of as well, increasing representation of women and girls in STEM. So a perfect candidate for this forum with HunterWiSE. I'm very appreciative she can join us tonight. I'll hand over to you, Lizzie.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks for inviting me. It's nice to see so many lovely faces in the audience and to be here to share my story today. My first slide will give you an idea of who I am and what I've kind of always been interested in, and that's bugs. Ever since I was tiny, I've been passionate about insects. And I won't tell you too much about my actual research today, but my whole career pathway has basically been finding ways to play with bugs in different capacities. And kind of like Madeleine, I had a mainly academic career trajectory for quite a long time, and I very recently switched into industry, and that's something that quite interests people. So I'll be talking a little bit about how that happened and what that kind of looked like. Here we go. So this is me. This is my career in academia. I grew up in Western Australia. I'm a Perth girl, and I just studied science because I knew I loved it, and I studied as much zoology as I possibly could. And I ended up with this zoology degree where I'd never actually touched a live animal, which I thought was kind of weird. It was a very, very theory-based degree, but I loved it, really loved zoology, but I had no idea. I didn't even really know what research was until I just by chance did an honours degree, as you do sometimes. I worked on honeybees, absolutely loved it, and suddenly realized that I could do research. So I was kind of like I was a so-so undergrad. Like I was passionate and I did okay. But then I discovered research and I realized that I was really good at research and I loved it. I loved actually being independent. I loved doing my own thing, loved developing these research projects, and really fell in love with research. But I still didn't really know where to take that. Like department was a little bit weird in that there wasn't a lot of conversation between the honours students and anybody else within the department. So you kind of just felt like an undergrad. I'd never met a PhD student. I'd never kind of talked to any of my professors. I didn't really know where to go next. And then I met this quite nice guy who was doing his PhD in engineering in a completely different field, and I ended up marrying him a couple of years later. But I actually, it opened up the world of PhD students to me, because I met his friends who were doing PhDs, and I'm just like, whoa, this is a thing. Like, I can stay at university. I don't have to leave and get a job. I can do a PhD. So I took this nice lad over to Sydney, and I started my PhD over there, and I started studying spiders. This kind of came around because I was really fascinated with this idea of urban ecology, the kind of the animals that can live in cities. And I moved to Sydney, and I found these golden orb weaving spiders, which are in this picture, and they were really, really everywhere in Sydney. And I wanted to know how and why they were surviving. So I did a whole PhD on that, and I loved it. I absolutely adored my PhD, almost every minute of it. Really, really enjoyed research. I had an amazing crew, and I just had pretty much an ideal experience as a PhD student. I think I had really, really good support. I met the most amazing people, and I loved living in Sydney. Then I did a postdoc at the University of Auckland. My next slide tells you all the life events that happened in between this. So this looks like a nice kind of direct career trajectory, but I'll show you all the inside bits in a second. Did a postdoc at the University of Auckland, and this was a really, really good stepping stone for me. So it was through an Endeavour Fellowship, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, but it's a 6-month postdoc fellowship. And I was able to do that straight after my PhD. And I said I was going to study beetles in ecosystems or something. I basically got no research properly done in that 6 months, because I was working in a brand new ecosystem, and I thought I could just step in as an ecologist and study New Zealand stuff, because it was the same as Australian stuff, right? It's not the same as Australian stuff. And beetles are really hard. Don't ever study beetles. So I didn't actually do much during that 6 months research-wise. Well, I did a lot, but it wasn't very successful. But I met some really amazing women, some really, really wonderful mentors who had families, who were really nice people. And I think that was important for me. I wanted to see you could be an academic, you could be a nice person, you could have a family and do that at the same time. And that really encouraged me to stay in academia. And I think by this stage, I had a very clear idea in my mind. I wanted to be an academic. I could see the skills that I had played really well in academia. I was a really good teacher. I loved research. I was really good at making networks. And so academia seemed like a really, really good spot for me. And then I moved to Macquarie University. So I was offered a postdoc there, and I was there for 4 and a bit years. Basically, it was an amazing position. Like Madeleine said she had at one stage, I can do my own research. I was basically free to do whatever I like. For the duration of that postdoc, I had a really good lab. I had PhD students. I started actually really developing my profile as a researcher and had the most amazing support. So it was a really, really good time for me. I often kind of show my career trajectory as the best case scenario. I had amazing support. I had passion for what I was doing. I had successes along the way, a lot of success. And I never really came up against any huge barriers, to be honest. I had quite a free sailing route through, and yet I still left. So I'll come back to that in a second. So this is kind of the other stuff that happened. There was a lot of moving around, which you often hear from early career researchers, that if you want to be successful, you've got to move. I don't know if you have to do it to be successful, but it makes a big difference being able to move. I started off in Perth, obviously. I moved to Sydney, I got married, I had 1 baby, and I actually moved back to Perth then. So I had the baby a couple of weeks after I handed in my PhD, which was pretty good timing. But it ended up that in the space of 4 weeks, I moved from Sydney to Perth, I bought a house, I handed in my PhD thesis, and I had a baby all within 4 weeks. So that's probably the most stressful period in my life, but, you know, tick off all the life events at once. That's cool. So I went back to Perth because I didn't want to be away from my family when I had my baby. And then I moved to Auckland. That was quite a long way away with a 6-month-old and dragging my partner along with me. Spent 6 months having a great time in Auckland, moved back to Perth because I really wanted to be in Perth with my baby and my husband, then got offered the job in Sydney. So moved back to Sydney again, full circle from where I left my PhD. You know, it was actually ended up being 8 months after I left Sydney. So I moved back to Sydney again with a little baby and then ended up back in Sydney again. but I think that the point that I really wanted to make here is that I had a life. I see so many people who think that they can't have a life at the same time as academia. I did a lot of travel. I went on lots of holidays. I did lots of non-research stuff. And I don't want people to think that you can't do those things if you're having a career in academia. I think they're actually even more important than all the other stuff, right? You've got to have a life at the same time. One of the questions I'm always asked is, when do I have a baby when I want a career in academia? To have a baby. Well, if you want one, have one. If you don't want one, please don't have one. but seriously, you know, kind of, you've got to make your own path and you've got to make it fit in where it works for you. And I will say that when I told my PhD supervisor I was pregnant, because I was about 2 and a bit years through my PhD, he gave me a huge hug and told me it was the best news he'd had all week. And that for me was just, it was everything. It meant everything to me. So having that kind of support just makes such a huge difference. And I will say also that academia gave me the time and the freedom to kind of find my own path. So because I had that postdoc where I could do whatever I want, I used that time to learn the skills I wanted, to kind of make really good networks with all of my interests. And I used this time to find out what I wanted to do with my skills, how I wanted to make a difference in the world. And this will come back again, I'll come back to this, because I think you need the time and space to be able to do that. And I think aside from everything else in your career trajectory, I think if you can whittle it down to one thing that you want to focus on, how you want to change the world, that one thing you want to do. I whittled all of mine down to, I really want to save bugs. Like, I want people to stop using insecticides, and I want to talk about insect conservation. That was my thing. That's how I'm going to save the world. And once I kind of had that in my brain, it made additional career choices much easier. So, oh yeah, I did another thing. So during this time, when I had my second baby, I was a bit bored. And so I started an environmental education business on the side, because when I was doing my PhD and these postdocs, I realized that one of my real skills was just talking to people and doing these kind of presentations, going to schools, talking to kids. It was something I really loved. And I was doing it all through my PhD for free, basically. I'd go to schools, I'd give talks all over the place. And suddenly, at one stage, somebody said, "Why aren't you getting paid for this?" And I was just like, wait, why aren't I getting paid for this? So I set up a business and basically quoted what I wanted for the talks that I was giving, mostly to local councils and groups like that. And they were very willing to pay me. So I think that's a message to everyone too. If you've got a skill, make sure you're getting paid for it, because people will pay. I think academics especially really undervalue their skills. And it's a really, really hard thing to put a price on those skills too. And I started very low. And actually at one stage I told a local council how much I was going to charge for a 1-hour talk. And she said, "I'll give you double." And then she paid me that. And from then on, that was my price going forward. So you definitely got to be in contact with the right people, but also, yeah, back yourself, make sure you're getting paid. Yeah, so I had an environmental education business too. I didn't make a lot of money, but it made me kind of expand my networks in a different direction as well. And now my transition to industry. So I had been a postdoc for 5 years. I had been more successful actually than I ever could have imagined. I published more papers than I ever would have expected. I made really, really good connections. And I had, you know, a couple of really successful jobs. So I started applying for fellowships, which is kind of one of the main ways to go forward in academia. And I spent 3 years basically spending almost half my time, I would say, putting towards writing fellowships and developing these ideas for moving forward in academia. And I mean, I came up with some really good ideas. I wrote quite a few different fellowship applications on different topics about stuff I was really, really interested in. And I always got to like almost the end, like, because these fellowships have a success rate of like 3%, and I'd be in the top maybe 5%. But then I kind of realized I'm never going to be top 3% material. You know, I love what I do. I'm actually really good at it, but I'm not top 3%, because the top 3% are the people possibly that don't go on holidays. They don't have 2 kids, you know, they don't have side businesses. And that's the reality of academia. And it hit me really hard. But after about 5 of these applications coming back, I just realized that it wasn't worth banging my head up against this wall anymore, because I would keep on banging up against that wall for the rest of my career, and I'm not the top 3%. So that's where I was. I did love academia. I loved a lot about it. There's a list of things there, but there was also things I didn't love. I was really sick of the job insecurity. So I spent, 6 months to a year in each of these contracts, and then it gets extended. And I was looking at the people at the stage above me, and they were miserable. And so I started kind of thinking about leaving. And this is how it happens. So there's this, I found this company called Caesar Australia. They do insect conservation work. They do pest control stuff. They do sustainable pest management, basically, which is one of my main interests. And they were hiring for a position which I wasn't suited for at all, but I applied for it. And they kind of said, yeah, we really like you. When can you move to Melbourne? Because this is a Melbourne-based company. And I said, no, I'm not moving to Melbourne. So that was where it kind of left it. And 6 months later, one of the researchers came back to me and she said, look, we've got 2 days a week. Do you want to come on just 2 days a week and run this pest facts program for us? You're writing articles, you're dealing with different types of pests, and you're giving information about them. And I said, yeah, 2 days a week sounds good. So I went down to 2 days a week at Macquarie and stayed 2 days and did 2 days a week at Caesar. And then within about 6 weeks, they said, look, we've got another position for you. We're going to make you a senior extension scientist, which is someone who takes the research to the end users, which I love, like it's really applied. Do you want to come on 4 days a week, which is more than what I wanted, basically. And I said yes. So I came on board and left academia. I'm still on Macquarie technically 3 hours a week, but it doesn't really count anymore. So I'm now a senior extension scientist. It's really useful work. It's real work. Somebody tells you a problem that they need solved and you solve it. It's a really quick turnaround. I write articles in days rather than years. And they really, really valued my communication skills, which is something that didn't happen in academia. I did all this communication stuff and nobody really cared in academia. It was always a footnote. And also it's a permanent position. So they matched my Macquarie salary. I've got a permanent position now. I can actually kind of make my impact here. And I like it. There are things I don't like. So they actually agreed to let me work fully remotely. So I live in Sydney and I work for a Melbourne company, and that's been super tough, especially with COVID. So I was supposed to go down there every month or so. I've been down once since I started at the beginning of this year. And yeah, that's really hard. I don't really feel part of the team because I've never spent much time with them. Also, time really equals money. So academics spend a lot of time kind of just faffing around doing stuff, doing things they find cool. I can't do that anymore. I basically allocate every one of my hours to a project, and that's how it works. And you can only really study applied stuff. And I find I'm not actually taken as seriously as I used to. So I wrote a conversation article recently, and when I got to the end of the process, I said, oh, my job title's changed. And she said, oh, wait, you're still an academic, aren't you? Because we can't publish this if you're not an academic. So I fell back on my 3 hours at Macquarie and I said, sure, I'm still at Macquarie. But that really annoyed me that I wasn't actually able to publish as a scientist through the conversation if I wasn't, a researcher at a university. This is everything I have on my slides. There is a lot more to my story, obviously, but I've taken up enough of your time already. So thanks so much for listening. And I'm looking forward to talking to some of you in the breakout rooms as well. Hopefully I can answer some more questions about this crazy idea of moving out of academia.
Oh, thanks so much, Lizzie. I could listen to you talk all day, I think. Some incredible pearls of wisdom in there. I love the, it's a misconception that people move out of academia because they couldn't make it in academia. I think that you've highlighted quite well that when you come down to it, what do you care about? What do you actually care about? And can you do that somewhere other than academia, potentially in a way that's more impactful, which is what you seem to have done with moving into your work with Caesar. So I think that, and also I was nodding so hard when you said, you've got to have a life. You've got to have a life. Because what happens if you get to the end and you didn't live your life? What happens if you just waited? I've got to wait till if I waited for a permanent position to have children, I would not have children yet. So, you can't just keep waiting. You've just got to do it and muddle through and live and just keep living through it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lizzie. All right, we have one final speaker tonight. So Dr. Kim Van Netten. I won't give too much of a background, but Kim actually did her PhD in chemical engineering after I joined chemical engineering as an academic. So we crossed paths for a very short period of time. But I'll hand over to Kim now to give you a bit of her story.
Thanks very much. It's certainly a privilege to go after three great speakers. And I also think this is a really great initiative from HunterWiSE, you know, to show where a STEM degree can take you, because I can say even a year before I changed my career pathway, I certainly wasn't considering a career in the public service, or even really knew that scientists and engineers were needed there. So how did I get there? Start from the start, I did an undergraduate in chemical engineering because I loved chemistry and maths and thought that was where the two disciplines came together. And then went on to do a PhD also in chemical engineering, just mostly because I loved research, and both of those were at the University of Newcastle. My PhD was on a novel process for agglomerating fine hydrophobic particles as a means of separating them from hydrophilic particles. So that was for applications in mineral processing in kind of the same way that flotation is used, but really designed to handle ultrafine particles, the kind that currently end up in tailings dams. When I started, all we had was an idea, and throughout my PhD, I was able to turn the idea into a viable process at the lab scale. In my postdoc, we worked on a pilot scale continuous version of the process, and this work is ongoing here at the uni today. I found this work to be incredibly interesting and loved the problem solving and creative thinking that was involved. But throughout my PhD, and more so in my postdoc period, I started to think more broadly about the problem I was trying to solve with my research. As I said, we were designing a process that could handle the material that currently goes to tailings. So in essence, we were working on a solution to increase resource recovery and reduce tailings, and that's a good outcome for the environment. And overall, that's really important work. But while I was doing this work, I realized that the technical solution we were designing was only part of a much broader picture, which is about how we manage and use our natural resources. Obviously, the scientific and technical parts are the most interesting, but natural resource management is a complex area with a number of interacting and competing factors. In addition to the scientific and technical factors, there are economic factors, environmental factors, social factors, geopolitical factors, and more. And I realized I wanted a way to make a contribution to solutions that took into account all of the factors. So I thought about how I could do that, and then realized that's exactly what public policy making is. It's about taking a problem or a situation and designing a solution that's in the best interest of the Australian public and takes into account all of the interconnected factors. Because if it doesn't, it probably won't be successful. So I started to look into the kinds of jobs that were available for someone with my skill set in state and federal level departments. And I kid you not, the day before I started looking, something called the Australian Policy Fellowship Program was posted by the Australian government. As I found out later, it was a program being piloted, so started the year I was looking, led by Australia's chief scientist, that was Dr. Levchenko at the time, and modelled off a successful program in the US, designed to bring science PhDs into the public service. And the reason behind the program is twofold. First, it's to create a pathway into the public service for people with a PhD in science, and so it broadens the skill set of the public service. And second, for those doing research that inform policy, they could use the program to come into government for a year, see how policy is made, and then when they return to research after the fellowship, they can better communicate and inform policymakers of their findings and feed into policy processes. When I told my PhD supervisors about the opportunity, that was Laureate Professor Kevin Galvin and Dr. Roberto Marino Atanasio, they were incredibly supportive. They were definitely disappointed that I had decided to leave research, but understood that this was the right decision for me. I was lucky to be successful in the fellowship program, although I now know there are plenty of ways someone with a STEM background can get into the public service. and I was placed in the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, as it was then called, into the Resources Division. In my fellowship year, I worked on the National Hydrogen Strategy and the National Resources Statement. So these were two major energy and resource policy documents, and have since worked in the Australian Government's Critical Minerals Facilitation Office. And I'm now an Executive Officer to the Head of Strategic Policy in the department. So I haven't looked back. I can say I haven't looked back since joining the public service. I mean, obviously moving into government is a big adjustment. There's a whole new language to learn. You're part of a much bigger operating environment, and you have to work within government processes to make things happen. But these are definitely hurdles that can be overcome with a bit of experience, and there are always people around that are willing to help. And I found that the public service really respects and values a STEM background, because STEM trained people are making a really important and valuable contribution. To illustrate, let me tell you a bit about my role in the development of the National Hydrogen Strategy. Actually, first, I'll take a step back and answer a more basic question you might have, which is, what even is public policy? Because I couldn't answer this question before I had my interview to join government. It's because it's kind of hard to define. But it's effectively when the government decides to undertake a course of action to achieve outcomes that wouldn't have been achieved in the policy's absence. So in the case of the hydrogen strategy, it set a vision for a clean, innovative, safe and competitive hydrogen industry that benefits all Australians, and aims to position our industry as a major global player by 2030. So it's the Australian government deciding on and setting into action a plan to achieve that. And so that's what the policy was. And now, what is the role of a scientist or an engineer in designing that policy, or what was my role? Well, I wrote large sections of the strategy, especially the parts that were more technical. So effectively, I was the communicator and translator of science. And actually, this is something I've done continuously throughout all the roles I've had in the public service. I also led the engagement with the industrial users of hydrogen in Australia. So, for example, companies making fertilizers. In this engagement, as someone with a STEM background, I was really able to understand the technicalities around the needs of industrial users. And so this understanding then informed the development of the strategy. And I led one of the technical consultancies we ran also to inform the development of the hydrogen strategy. So I worked with engineers in that consultant group to deliver the report. So I actually, the contribution and the value of a STEM background in those activities is probably pretty obvious. But I wanted to stress that the importance of STEM skills goes beyond the technical contributions to policymaking. People with training in STEM have strong critical and analytical frameworks and a unique way of looking at and solving problems that complements the other skill sets that you often find in the public service, so the economists and the lawyers. And just to finish, I would highly recommend a career in the public service if you're looking to use your skills to help design solutions for the Australian public. And in fact, the program that I came in through, the Science Policy Fellowships, is run yearly, and it will be open for applications again at the start of next year for next year's intake. And that's for people with a PhD in science and aimed at early to mid-career researchers. But as I said, it's definitely not the only way in. So I hope tonight I've been able to show you another possible pathway in a STEM career, and that you can use my experiences and insights when you ask yourself the question, what's next? Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kim. I think it's interesting because Lizzie touched on it too, that science communication can be quite undervalued, I think, in academia. But it's so critical, it's so crucial, and particularly for government and for putting science into actual policy that might actually make a difference, like you said.
Really important.
And, you know, they've got economists, they've got lawyers. Of course, they should have scientists and engineers as well that are involved in making this policy. So thank you so much, Kim. And thanks to all our speakers for their fantastic presentations. We'll do a couple of questions before we go into our breakout rooms. and you can direct it towards one speaker, or we can just put it out there. Feel free to pop something in the chat. I haven't seen anything come through as yet, so we're saving them for the end. But I might start off with a quick question I might start with Kim. I've got her on my screen still. Just thinking about the government. So there's the Science Policy Fellowship program to go in through. I've also often see like government jobs advertised that maybe aren't targeted at academics. How would you recommend academics or scientists to apply for them, or how do people position themselves for those sort of entry?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can probably find when the jobs advertised, they'll be for specific areas, so specific policy areas in government. So you might be able to find one in climate change or the environment. Science and commercialization is in my department. So you can see what kinds of work you'd be working on. And I would say that if you can demonstrate, so scientists, just a degree in science is enough for an APS level job. But if you can just demonstrate an interest and an understanding of the broader kind of government policy environment, that's a really good start.
Yeah, right. Don't have any other questions as yet. We're saving them all for the breakout rooms, maybe. Oh, here we go. We've got one for Lizzie that's just been messaged to me. So Lizzie, you mentioned some great mentors. I'm wondering what made these mentors great for you, or what you suggest someone should look for in a mentor.
Yeah, that's a really awesome question. I've had formal mentorships and non-formal mentorships, and the formal ones have never worked. Whenever I've been allocated someone, doesn't work at all. When you naturally find your mentors, it's much, much more effective. And for me, the most important thing for a mentor is that they speak not for you, but they raise you up. So they look for opportunities for you. They send you job applications. They read through your job applications. And they speak within their networks fondly of you, and they push you forward. But I've actually found peer mentors just as useful as mentors that are much higher up. And I think that's something that's very often devalued. So especially when I was a postdoc, the other postdocs that were the same stage as me or slightly higher, being able to lean on them, for them to read through my applications, just to throw an idea at them, hugely, hugely valuable. So my advice would be find your own mentors, find your own little group. You don't have to make it official. I always found it super awkward making an official mentorship relationship. And yet I've got lots of people who I would consider mentors as part of my friendship groups and my broader academic network. Every now and then I mention to them that they should be claiming this as mentorship, like for their applications and things, because mentorship is actually really important for applying for like new jobs and things. But yeah, so they can make it as official as they like, but I try and make it as casual as possible.
Yeah, it's true. And then it can be really useful, your peers, like you said, and even reverse mentoring, I think can be useful. So, having a relationship yourself with someone who's a bit earlier in their career journey as well can be really useful, I think. We've got a couple of questions that have come through here. So are there any indicators that can help you decide whether a postdoc is for you? Maybe I'll hand that one over to Madeleine.
Sure. Can I just get a clarification? Do you mean like whether doing a postdoc in general is a good idea, or if a specific postdoc is like, what are the good signs about, say, a job that's come up?
I think maybe a postdoc in general. Let's go.
Okay. I mean, it's kind of hard. Like in hindsight, I think if I could have maybe gotten out of academia a little bit earlier without doing the postdocs, that would have been a better way to develop my career, because postdocs are useful and you definitely get a lot of useful skills out of them, in terms of science, but also often as a postdoc, you tend to do a little bit more, take on a few more senior roles. You might be mentoring PhD students. So you do get a lot of good skills, even if you choose not to continue into academia. But I think if you're not planning to sort of go into academia long term, I'm not sure if a postdoc is necessarily the best way to spend your time. Like in hindsight, I liked the postdocs I did, like I had a good time and I learned a lot, but it definitely wasn't the best way to get where I got to in the end. So, but of course, sometimes you get to the end of your PhD and you've got all these academic skills and you don't know where to take them. And sometimes a postdoc comes up that sounds interesting and like, why not? It's really hard to predict sort of what the best.
And like you said, and I think Lizzie touched on it as well, and Ria, that it gives you a little bit of a chance to figure out what you actually like when you have that time to spend and that independence to explore.
Yeah, sometimes, you never know what you actually like unless you do that thing. So I think it is always better to try something to know actually which one you like, whether academia or industry. When I was in academics, I was a really good teacher. Like my school supervisor was always pushing me to go, towards teaching because my feedback was coming constantly good. But then even I enjoy teaching, but, I never know how I will be, in industry. So I thought like, no, I will try for some time industry and then maybe I will make my mind. So because I never tried something, so I didn't know. So same thing, with the subject as well, whether you want to choose science, math, or whatever it is. I think it's always better to give it a try and then see how's it going.
Yeah, and I've got another question that's been messaged to me that's a bit of a broad question, but we'll start with you, Ria. So if you're still in a PhD program, how would you go about diversifying your skills in preparation for work outside of academia? So you did that within your PhD.
I did many. So with my PhD, I was doing casual tutoring. I was doing a UK project. So I worked for a COVID project where we developed a methodology for social distancing. I also worked separate for another project, which was my personal project. I also developed some ideas for my future business, so which I don't want to disclose here, but yes, I was working, I think 10 times more what I was doing in my PhD. And I think that helped me really to, to decide which area is better for me or what I'm really liking. And as I said, like if I was not starting working in artificial intelligence, I was never even knowing that what I like. But now I know that this is my future. This is what I really love doing it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ria. And there was another question that I've gotten a few now. We'll just do these last two and then we'll go into the breakout room so we can get a few more questions flowing because it seems like there's a lot coming through now. So a question from Helen, if you really like science and maths, how do you know which science electives to choose in your HSC? Wow, so early on, what level maths? I think just from my experience, you don't really know what you want to do at that age. You've got a good feeling for you like science, you like maths. When you're choosing your subjects in your HSC, there's a whole range of different reasons you might choose them, but I would definitely encourage if you're looking at engineering to do some maths, definitely get some maths in there. If you're really interested in science and research, then also maths is very useful for that. So do the highest level maths that you can comfortably do while challenging yourself a little bit as well.
But there's a little misconception with the mathematics. People just think like with mathematics, you can only go in academics, you cannot enter in industry. But I would just like to say that with mathematics, you can go in any field. You can go in science field, you can go in engineering field, you can go even in a government field or any sort of field because mathematics is just everywhere. So just to clarify this, if you're going in mathematics, you're not finishing your career. You're actually building your career to another level.
Yeah, I saw Kim nodding emphatically to that one. Did you want to weigh in on that one too, Kim?
Yeah, I come across plenty of mathematicians in my day job and in consultancies that we work with as well, mathematicians that have found their way into engineering type work for writing reports. So I have to agree with that.
Great. Okay, well, we might move into the breakout rooms now and we can have a little bit more one-on-one or slightly more one-on-one chat, 25 on 1. So Lee, if you can get us set up to get going, and everyone will join the breakout rooms for a slightly more casual chat. We'll just hang out awkwardly until we're moved into the rooms. Thank you so much for coming along to the event today. Some people are still coming back in, but this is just the quick thank you and wrap up. So firstly, thank you to everyone for coming along to this HunterWiSE event. I think it's been amazing. I've really enjoyed it and I've looked forward to it for a while now, and I think it's lived up to all my expectations. And so Lee is going to pop a few little links in the chat if you want to get involved with the HunterWiSE networks, follow along or come to another event. You'd be more than welcome to do so. So also, I firstly want to start by thanking the speakers. Thank you so much for taking the time out to come and talk to us tonight. Purely voluntary and just so appreciative of the time that you've put in. I think that I can speak for everyone here and say that I appreciate your time, and I've learned so much from all of you already. So thank you to our speakers, especially at this tricky time of night, as we saw at the start of the talk. Also to my co-host, Elena Levchenko, who moderated the second breakout room, thank you. Special thank you to Leah Kim and Camille as well for their technical support, particularly to Leah for her spectacular organisation of this event. She put a lot of work into all of the comms and all of the contact and coordination with the speakers. And so thank you so much for that. Thank you to the HunterWiSE team for having me as an honorary member for this EMCR-led event. Very much appreciated to be involved, and just thank you in general to the HunterWiSE team for their fabulous leadership as women in the University of Newcastle and professors. And just thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your evening. I hope to see you at another event.